So I will hand over to the fabulous Mary Wanless. Mary, thank you so much. I'll turn my camera off, but I'm still here if you need me.
Okay. And if it's appropriate to lob a question at me as we're going along, then do.
No problem at all. No worries. Thank you so much.
So, so I've stepped in for Ali this evening at pretty short notice. So this is a webinar that I've done before and have kind of revisited, but haven't sweated over in the way I normally do in the days before presenting a webinar. So hopefully it will go okay. And it's called the 3 Toolkits. And this will become clear as we go along. Subtitled, Why the Disparate Factions of the Horse World Can't Understand Each Other or Talk to Each Other, which I think is really the case. And it's also about having 3 maps is better than only having 1. Even if the horse world persists in thinking that anything that is not my map must be wrong, crazy, or irrelevant. So we have a poll to start off with here, which is, have you any idea what all of this means? Have you heard of the toolkits before? Do you know what any of them are? So those of you who've been on Ali's webinars before may do, because I think she's just been working with one of the toolkits in the information she's given you so far. So can we launch that, Heidi, and just see what people say? I'm going to try.
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to launch it because if I'm not presenting the slides. I'm just trying. Sorry, technical failures on my side. People.
Well, we could have people just put anything in the chat that they
do that. That would be fantastic. Yes.
So are you going, what the hell is this about? Or, oh yes, I've got a vague idea of this, or yes, I think I understand one of them.
Anybody come across the toolkits before?
And it's absolutely fine to say I have no clue.
Yes, absolutely. Lynn has said she's been to one of your demonstrations before, so she's in the know. Thank you, Lynn. Anybody else got any comments there? No. Groundwork's okay. Biomechanics. Biomechanics. So yes, we've got some people coming back.
Okay. Yes. So some idea at least about one of them.
Yes.
Okay. So let's go from here. So, you know, most trainers, coaches, instructors, whatever people like to call themselves, are trained in one of the toolkits, and this almost certainly will always be their home base. So what's true for me is my own home base, and my first love is what I call the first toolkit, and it is rider biomechanics. And that's really what my books are about. And what my job is to really try and get out there in the horse world. But I want to get it out there within the context that it's not everything. It is one map of the territory of riding. And having more maps gives us more information about any territory. So if you think about having a road map and a population map of that area and a rainfall map and maybe a geology map, the fact that you have one of those maps doesn't make the other maps wrong. They're all related to each other. You know, there'll be more roads where there's more population, and there won't be so many people living up in the mountains where the rainfall falls more and the geology is probably more granite and things like that. So all of these maps relate to each other, and they're a different way of describing the same territory, and they're equally valid. But a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that the map itself is the territory. But the map is not the territory. So whilst in the horse world, lots of people act as if the map and the territory are equivalent. If you think about that, if you went to a restaurant and you made that mistake that the map and the territory are the same, you'd eat the menu, right? Because you wouldn't appreciate the menu is only a map. Mapping for you, telling you about the meal you're about to eat. So when you make a map territory violation, you effectively eat the menu. And I'm going to suggest that many of us in the horse world are doing that all the time, really just kind of out of ignorance. But really seeing the distinction between the map and a territory and the many different ways in which you can map a territory is really useful. So you probably do know the story of the three blind men and the elephant. And, you know, one of them grabs the elephant trunk and one of them gets hold of the elephant's leg and another one gets hold of the elephant's tail. And they all argue about, oh, it's really big and round. Oh, it's really skinny and round. And it's got hairs on the end. And it's, you know, they all think they've got something different rather than realizing they all have one part of the elephant. But I have a lot of hope for the next generation. The young people growing up around me are certainly growing up with a good amount of expertise in all of these maps, understanding how they interact and explain different things, and give us these three toolkits and three different ways of looking at the rider-horse or human-horse interaction. So just a little bit about rider biomechanics. So these are two of my favorite photographs. They show world-class biomechanics in action. These riders are doing what I teach. The one on the right is Laura Beckelsteimer, as was when she was riding her horse Alf, that's Mistral Horis. That was before she had 4 babies and a herniated disc, and is coming back to riding with 4 children, discovering it's a rather more difficult challenge than if the biggest thing you have to do each day is to ride your one horse and maybe write an essay for your university degree. So she rode this horse supremely well. And if you look at her here, she's in extended trot and one of the most powerful horses in the world. And we could ask, well, what would happen to her if we cut the reins? And it just looks like she wouldn't budge. If we took the horse out from underneath her by magic, how would she land on the riding arena? Well, she'd land stacked up over her feet like a martial artist. If we look at the rider on the left, which is a young German rider in Piaf, again, you can see how beautifully organized she is. And one of the things that's noticeable about these two riders is that both of them have their torso as what I would call a really good box. The length of their front matches the length of their back. They're not hollow-backed with their chest too up. They're not growing tall and sticking their chest out. So in a way, this is just an aside and just showing you some of the ultimate examples of really good biomechanics in action. And I think Ali's next webinar is going to begin to delve into the first toolkit. And we're not doing much more of that here, although I do have a picture of myself here, not such a good quality picture. So it is true, I certainly don't claim to be a riding genius, but what I've learned through my 40+ year research project into the structure of talent and the rider-horse interaction has been profound. And I really have run the last 40+ years as an experiment. So as a physicist, I had a pretty good idea of how to do an experiment and keep looking for patterns and finding out what patterns were consistent between people and horses and what the individual variations of the theme were and what the basic principles were and how I was seeing the laws of physics acted out in front of me. And that created a map, one of the 3 that's applicable to riders at all levels. And I regard myself as the messenger who's made the laws of physics and biomechanics accessible to any dedicated learner. And there are reasons why willpower and obedience so often fail. And there are ways around that that make riding skills way more teachable and learnable when you come from a viable map. So I can't resist selling my favorite map here a little bit. Rider biomechanics really matters because your horse actually knows more about you than you know about yourself. Now, this can kind of be embarrassing, but it really is true. So your horse cannot not notice of you as his rider, have your center of mass over his, ahead of his, or behind his. So your center of mass is a point in the middle of your pelvis, which is where your weight basically acts. And your center of mass should be over his, for him to be able to carry you without having to make compensations for your disorganization. Your horse knows if you support your body weight well or sit like a sack of potatoes. He knows if your style is to wiggle and jiggle, to shove, to nag. He's affected by your asymmetry, especially on turns and in lateral movements. And one of the things that conventional riding theory really doesn't get is that you cannot not influence. Just by virtue of how you sit and how organized or disorganized you are, you're having an influence for good or ill. And you probably have no idea how precise this interaction can become. I mean, the subtlety of this as you begin to peel the layers and work your way through what I think of as layers of an onion, peeling each layer as you get to more sensitivity and closer, as it were, to the bullseye in the middle of the onion. The precision of it is amazing. And as well as this, your horse always knows your emotional bottom line, like how easily will you quit? How much do you really mean it? Will you easily back off? How intimidatable are you? In that way too, he may know more about you than you know about yourself. And here's another way it happens. So you can be riding along and you lose your focus, but you don't realize it's happened. And then suddenly your horse is pricking his ears looking at the view. And you're going, my horse just lost it. And your horse is basically going, well, actually, I only lost it because you lost it. You exited, so I didn't need to be there. So why should I be focused when you're not? And that means your horse knows more about what's going on in your brain than you do. And that should be really embarrassing because he knows that you lost your focus on yourself and him and had an extraneous thought when you didn't know. Horses are wonderful, aren't they? They just know so much. And they are so good at reading us. And we have to go on such a training course to learn to read our horses in the way that the horses are born able to read us. It's quite staggering and shocking, really. Okay, so we're now going to get more into the toolkits in general, rather than me getting on my bandwagon of rider biomechanics as the first toolkit. And in all that follows, I'm going to consider the rider as cause and the horse's effect. Okay, now this is a kind of construct on my part, but it's a useful one. But I want to make it clear that I do realize that in riding's less comfortable moments, it might not feel like that. And all of us at times have felt like the victim of the horse's maneuvers, where we felt that the horse is cause and we are effect. But the ideal is that we are cause and the horse is effect. One of my favorite sayings is the question, does the organized rider organize the disorganized horse? Or does the disorganized horse disorganize the organized rider? I hope that was clear to you. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but it says it really well. Does the organized rider organize the disorganized horse, or does the disorganized horse disorganize the organized rider? Or another way we could look at it is to say, who leads the dance? Is the rider leading the dance, or is the horse leading the dance? And whilst in normal language, we might talk about, quote, a following seat or the rider following the movement, I think that's very dubious because the rider leads the dance. In the rider-horse relationship, the rider would be like the man who leads the dance, and the horse is like the woman who follows the dance. And when the horse starts to lead the dance, that's when things can begin to go wrong. So your aim is to be the lead dancing partner. So if you read this, the left-hand side of the slide from the bottom upwards, we have the rider as cause, the horse as effect, and ideal effect as what would give you a 10 on a dressage test. Right? So rider as cause, horse's effect, and ideal effect, which would give you a 10. So if we were to draw on this chart, as it were, a horizontal arrow pointing to the left to represent a trainer's interventions in a typical dressage lesson, where would this arrow go? And I wonder if you'd like to put your answer in the chat. Would some of you be brave enough to make a suggestion? Typical interventions in a dressage lesson, we make a horizontal arrow pointing to the left. Where would the arrow go? So Heidi, I'm hoping you can feed back to me what anybody says on this.
Yeah, we have. We've got a vote for horse, 2 for rider. Anybody else got any more? Might depend on your trainer. Oh, another one for rider. So we've got the majority saying rider of the people there. Oh, another rider. Yep. So the majority are saying rider.
All right. Now, I think that's not so true, actually. That might be more true in a riding school type lesson. But in a dressage lesson, I think more often the trainer is talking about the horse and starts from the premise of the horse. And actually, I think that arrow would go here between effect and ideal effect. So comments might be, for instance, make the horse rounder. And what the trainer doesn't say is because then you'd score closer to a 10. Or he needs more impulsion because then you score closer to a 10. Or ride shoulder in because that would engage the inside hind leg and blah, blah, blah. Bend the horse to the inside and. So the question here is, what is being assumed by the trainer who's making these statements? And maybe again, you could put your suggestions in the chat. So what is being assumed if the trainer is coming in at this level, which is between effect and ideal effect, how the horse is going and how we really want the horse to go? So what's being assumed by the trainer?
So the replies we've got that you know how to affect the horse.
Exactly. Yes. So the trainer is assuming that the rider knows how to make that happen. Okay. Now, I think that's a really big assumption, and that it's very easy when you're in the middle of the arena coaching or training to almost act as if you're coaching yourself. Yeah. So the trainer might say to themselves, what if I was riding this horse? I'd ride shoulder in because that would engage the inside hind leg and. But of course, the person in front of you wouldn't have your skill set and might well grab the inside rein and pull the horse's nose to the inside and keep bumping. And, you know, things aren't going to work like that. So there would be times when the trainer can assume those skills in the rider in front of them. But I think it's much less often than most trainers assume. So this assumption that the rider has the skills to turn what's actually happening into the ideal by following these instructions, that's a big assumption. Okay, so these interventions are the second toolkit. And what the second toolkit mostly does is prescribe the school movements. If we intervene between the rider as cause and the horse as effect, we're mostly working on changing the rider in order to change the horse. And that means improving the rider's biomechanics in order to change the horse. And this is more the toolkit that I've developed, and this is the first toolkit. So you've got changing the horse through the gymnastic challenges of the school movements, which can certainly work if people have the skills to do that, and changing the horse through improving the rider's way of sitting and being organized up there herself. So each of these levels of interventions, and note that they happen between the rider and the horse, changing the rider to change the horse, or effect and ideal effect, changing the horse to make everything work better without addressing the rider, but just trying to address the horse. You have the question, what questions do each of these interventions answer? Now, that's possibly a rather tricky one to get you to put in the chat. I'm getting close to asking you to mind read here what's going on in my mind. So I'm going to give you the answers for these. So between the horse's effect and ideal effect, we're answering the question, what? What should it look like? This is declarative knowledge. That's what it's called. It's the left brain knowledge that you could learn from books. So it goes, the horse's pole should be the highest point. The nose should be on or in front of vertical. The hind leg, when he's tracking up, should step into the footprint of the foreleg. That's in trot. So it's declarative knowledge. It answers the question what it should look like, and can we make it look more like it should look like by doing these various movements. When we intervene between horse, or between the rider as cause and the horse's effect, working on the rider's biomechanics, we're answering the question, how? How do you do that? Right? Now, I am not a talented rider. I needed to answer that question for myself. And in doing so, have answered it for the rest of the world in terms of people who want to know and want this answer. This is known as procedural knowledge. How do you proceed? How do you do that? And it's the right brain knowledge of actual skill. It's not you've read the books, you've watched the DVDs, you've been to the demos, you've had the lessons, you can recite the language. It's the skills that you actually have within your body, within your neurological pathways, within your organization. And very often, this is the skill that a talented rider will have, but has no words to describe, and therefore just goes from the second toolkit. It's an interesting question to ask, well, how do you explain the taste of strawberry jam? So asking the question, how do you get a horse on the bit? What's it like to have a horse on the bit? Is like asking, how do you explain the taste of strawberry jam? And when, how do you explain the taste of strawberry jam is asked to riders and trainers, they came back with the answer of, well, strawberry jam is red and it has lumps in, and the lumps are strawberries. And you're left going, but yes, how do you make it? And what does it taste like? And your question hasn't been answered. And the Howto toolkit is really aimed to answer that kind of question, to explain to you how to make strawberry jam and what it tastes like. In other words, how to change the horse's body, to organize him so his body works well, and how within your body to make the changes that do that. Okay, maybe we should just take a quick little stop here and just go, have I lost you? Are you with me? Are you following so far? Have you got pressing questions?
We haven't got any questions in the Q&A so far. Anybody want to chat? It's good, says Jan. That's...
Okay, so I'm not blinding you with science too much here.
Any more comments? Anyone want to slow down, speed up, go over something? I think we're good.
You think we're good?
Absolutely fantastic. There you go. There's...
All right. Okay, so let's keep going here. So if you're not a talented rider, what you need is more how-to knowledge. And I think I can honestly say the horse world has not excelled in this. At its worst, training and instructing can become do it more, do it now, do it again, do it better. In fact, one of my friends who sadly died a few years ago is an American rider and coach and judge, and actually a writer, Sandy Howard. She was on the US teams in the early 80s. And she talked about how in those days, the team training sessions, which were run by a Swedish guy. So the team, USA team coach, was a Swedish rider who was a big name in that day. And their training sessions used to degenerate into him screaming, "Ride better!" Now, if it can happen at that level, it can happen at any level. And fortunately, all the innovations in this country to get people understanding coaching rather than instructing are good steps in the right direction. But you have to have how-to information to be able to fill in the steps of, so how do you do it better? So coaching aims to differ in style to instruction, showing you how to do something in bite-sized chunks, learnable chunks, that are what I call next step fixes. So I think of riding as having its alphabet. You have to learn the ABCs before you learn the DEFs and the GHIJs and so on as you work your way through the alphabet. And of course, the danger is that if you ask an elite rider how to do something, they're going to tell you, well, you do X. And X is only going to work if you can do A, B, C, and D, E, F and work your way through the alphabet. And then X will make sense to you. So I think the most famous coaching relationship where that really happened was Charlotte Dujardin arriving for the first time in Carl Hester's arena with her thoroughbred. And Carl was able to talk to her in a way that she was doing enough right, that what he suggested were viable next steps. And I think she came back for the second lesson going, "I think this is Piaf. Is this Piaf?" And sort of trotted on the spot. And Carl went, "Yes, that's Piaf. And actually, it's rather good. It's better than you often see in international competitions. Maybe you'd like to come and work here." And that was the beginning of a coaching relationship that really worked. But here's a question for you. How could good how-to information not involve your whole body? Because in 40 plus years of coaching, no one has ever appeared in front of me in my arena as a disembodied pair of arms and a disembodied pair of legs. Nobody has just been an inside and an outside hand and an inside and an outside leg. They all have bodies with torsos and backsides and spines and everything joined to everything else. So how-to information cannot just be about this leg here and that hand there, because when you have a whole body, it's not quite that simple. But so far, we've come up with two maps, right? We have what I call the first toolkit of rider biomechanics and the how-to information, and the second toolkit of the gymnastic challenges of the school movements and how to use them to improve the horse. But we still need another map. And this is the map that I think Ali has talked to you about over the webinars that she's done. So if we start from the top here, we've got the declarative knowledge, what it should look like. The interventions usually prescribe the school movements, and they are the second toolkit. That's the right shoulder in, because that will make him rounder and engage the inside hind leg and that kind of thing. Then we have the how do you do that? Procedural knowledge, rider biomechanics, and the first toolkit. And then beneath this, beneath everything, at what we think of as ground zero, we have what we call the zero toolkit. And I believe Ali's webinars have been talking about this. And this is operant conditioning. And from the ground, giving the horse a conscious understanding of the reins as woe, the legs as go, how the hind leg steps under the body as it adducts, that's kind of adds it to the midline, and how we teach the horse that the front leg steps away from the body to make a turn, that's abduction. Think of, horrible idea, but think of somebody abducting a child, something like that. That shows you what abduction is. That's a take away from the midline. And this toolkit also involves what we call reactivity, the horse's responsiveness to the aid to woe, or to go, or to move the front leg, or move the hind leg. And what Ali has done with you in previous webinars is given you an introduction to the way that we teach Andrew McLean's equine learning theory. So Dr. Andrew McLean is Australian. He was in the Australian event team. He was also a zoologist, and he kind of woke up one day and realized that the way he trained horses bore no resemblance to what he knew about animal learning as a zoologist. And he set out to really find out how horses learned. Now, what's shocking is how few horses really have a conscious understanding of the reins as woe and the legs as go. And this always becomes clear to me if I end up going to look to a horse for buy, look at a horse to buy, whether it's for myself or for a client. And I have to say, I try to avoid doing this. I hate buying and selling horses. But when I do, I will normally start on the ground. You know, we've seen the horse ridden a little bit, maybe on the lunge, and I will just take it on the ground and I will just test. If I do whip taps where my leg would be in the training position, which you probably know about, facing the horse, so I get to walk backwards. Does the horse understand that as go? And when we stop, does the horse understand my hand that are holding the reins moving back towards his chest as a woe? And if you've watched and listened to Ali's webinars, you'll know that in order to get the horse to have this understanding and really know that he's got it, we have to set it up so he doesn't just follow your feet. Because if he goes when you go and he stops when you stop, we don't know that he understands the aids as we will transfer them from the ground to ridden. So that system has a really big advantage that it uses the aids we will use when riding from the get-go on the ground. And that saves you from teaching one thing on the ground and getting on and teaching something totally different. So the Zero Toolkit, as Andrew says himself, it's almost like he's down in the basement, he's down in the engine room, he's just making sure the joints are oiled and everything works as a basic way of the engine running. The notion of ground zero is a really good one. And from the horse's point of view in that, what happens is he kind of experiments with options until he finds the option that gets you to back off and give him release. And it's interesting, the name operant conditioning was coined many years ago by Skinner, who you may have heard of. He did lots of work with pigeons. And from the animal's point of view, the animal is operating the system, because when he finds the right response that gets you to back off, he's kind of in charge. And he just experiments till he finds that response. So you could think of, for instance, you whip tap on the horse's hindquarter, on the side of his hindquarter, to get him to move his hind leg in under his body. And supposing he responds to that by doing nothing, will you keep whip tapping till you get a response? And then supposing he lifts his hind leg to kick out, you just keep whip tapping because it's the wrong response. And when he puts it back on the ground or he takes a step that's kind of in the right direction, you immediately stop. And it doesn't take horses very long to work out which response gets you to back off and gets them release. And they're learning by trial and error. And when we're coaching riders using the first toolkit, we're really trying to get riders to experiment and work things out by trial and error with some guidance from us. Because when you learn anything that way, you get to own it. You get to know it in your bones. And if somebody says, well, just do this and you do it, it's never the same. So trial and error learning is the baseline for both the Zero Toolkit as horses learn and the first toolkit as riders learn. Okay, but we still need to expand a bit the Zero Toolkit. So let's start from the top again. We've got the second toolkit, the what it should look like, the make the horse more this, make the horse more that, ride a circle, ride shoulder in, do this, do that because of. And very often that's almost where people start. You know, well, you can go up, down, well enough, good enough, let's do shoulder in. Or you can go up, down, well enough, let's do a circle. Let's, you know, get into the second toolkit. So we've then got the idea of the first toolkit, the how do you do that, the procedural knowledge, the rider biomechanics. Okay, ground zero, operant conditioning, understanding of woe and go. I've got a typo there that when I went back into my slides, I found I couldn't correct. The hind leg stepping under the body, the front leg stepping away from the body. But we like, as part of the zero toolkit, to also ask, is the horse physically capable of doing what we want? And to include in this the state of his feet, whether his saddle fits, his diet, his teeth, and indeed his whole body. And is the condition that he's in, is the state his body in, helping or hindering? And if you think about how many people you might know who aren't actually lame, but who are the walking wounded, they have aches and pains, they have headaches, but they don't actually limp. There's an awful lot of horses that are also the walking wounded. They don't actually limp, although they may do, actually, if observed through a really astute eye of a really good vet or physio. But all horses benefit so much from really good care in this regard and regular body work to keep their body functional and able to do what we're asking them to do. Now, I was going to suggest another poll here, but maybe we will just have you put your answers in the chat. So
I can get the poll up if you'd like. Would you prefer the poll?
Yeah, go on, let's try it then.
Yeah, I've sorted myself out. So there we go, launch the poll. So there's a few questions you might need to whiz down.
Okay, so I can read through these questions here. So the first is, which of these toolkits is your home base? The chances are it's one of them, and one in particular. How much have you invested in learning about it and becoming skillful within it? Have you known about the other toolkits? If so, have you embraced them with an open mind? And how much have you invested in learning about them? So we'll give you a little while to fill in the pieces here.
Yeah, so hopefully you just need to tap away. We haven't had anybody answer yet, so I'm hoping the poll's working.
So I'm hoping we've got yes, no, and
yeah, we've got
1, 2, 3, those kind of answers.
Yeah, there we go. Answering. So yeah, the toolkits to toolkit 0, toolkit 1, and toolkit 2. And then we've got 1 to 10 for how much you've invested in learning. About the other toolkits away from your home one. So just bob your answers in if you can, that'll be amazing. Quite a few there, so we'll give you another couple of minutes just to finish those off. So I'll end the poll and then we'll see the results. So we've got which of these is your home? We're split between 0 and 1. 2 is lower. How much have you invested in learning about it and becoming skillful? Highest score is 6, but then we've got lots of people voting between 4 and 9. A reasonable amount. Have you known about the other toolkits? Slightly more people say yes. Have you embraced them with an open mind? Everybody says yes, which is fabulous. And how much have you invested in learning about them? We've got 3. Few people say 5, 6. More people say 8. So quite mixed.
Okay.
Results.
All right. But certainly sounds like some people have broadened themselves out from, you know, I have the right map, everybody else is crazy, which is historically, I think, the way it's been. So, written groundwork is the bridge from the 0 to the first toolkit for a young horse. And what that means is that you're up there just aiming to have your body in the right place, but to where you had the whip tap on the horse's side, use your leg on the horse's side. Where you use the rein from the ground, begin to use the rein from on top. And in a horse with no baggage, this can be close to seamless. You get on the horse and you make sense to him in a language he's already learnt. When you have the baggage of a remedial horse, this can overshadow his no learning. So let me tell you a story about this. So this is the chestnut horse that you saw me riding in that photograph early on. And I knew I didn't have the full story when I bought him as a 6-year-old. And so, you know, we start off doing groundwork and he got really pretty good at the groundwork. And I was riding him too, and that was all right. And then one day I decided to do hind leg adduction steps. So I put the reins in one hand and I put the stick against the side of his hind quarter and I whip tapped on his hind quarter just like I would have done on the ground. And he went to leap and rear. I don't know if any of you have been on that sort of leaping, rearing scenario. Now, I managed to abort it. It didn't actually happen, but that was what was going to happen. So he didn't just go, yes, I know this signal. He went, holy shit, this woman's going to ask me to step my heart. So what had to happen was I had to call in a helper so that somebody from the ground could use the stick in that place. And I could just sit there and endeavor to just be on a good balance point, but neutral, not doing anything, so that he got to just have me up there as, you know, ballast whilst he did what he'd learned on the ground. And we had to do this for quite a while before my groundwork person could just have hold of the reins and just move his hindquarters to where I could then take the stick and I could just move his hindquarters and he could go, oh, you mean it's that simple? So to a horse with no baggage, it really can be that simple from groundwork to riding. With a horse with baggage, it can be a little more complicated. And Andrew coined the term overshadowing, which I think is a great term. So his history as a ridden horse overshadowed the simplicity and the skills that he'd learned on the ground. And it was quite a long period of time before it became no big deal. Okay, so ironically, some of the very skilled proponents of the 0 toolkit, you know, the big names in the natural horsemanship world, whoever you might want to think of, very often have very good first toolkit skills as part of their talent and unconscious competence. So in other words, they don't know what they've got that's making it all work so well. So they would jump from the 0 toolkit to the second toolkit. They're taking their biomechanical skills for granted and don't realize the correctness they bring to their riding, but their students don't. Now, the bottom line is that skills that cannot be expressed in language remain hidden. They cannot be passed on to the next generation. And I've looked into the literature on expertise quite a lot, and that's expertise in any field. It's not expertise in riding. So expertise is a subject of academic studies within universities. And one of the big researchers in the field coined the phrase, the curse of expertise. And the curse of expertise is that you cannot explain your skill in language because it's just so right brain in your neurological pathways, in your tissues, that you don't know what you're doing. You're a bit like the goldfish who wouldn't discover water. You're so immersed in it. So another phrase from the literature actually is, and this is a quote, expertise-induced amnesia. That if you're an expert, and let's say you're Charlotte Dujardin, you got on the pony at age 6 and you just did ABC really well, and you did DEF really well, and you learnt GHIJ between 6 and 10, and so it went on. If somebody asked you to teach ABC, could you do it? You couldn't, because you just think that's part of the package you get when you're born human. And the things you learnt in your formative years, you're going to be so far down the alphabet that you will be clueless in a conscious mind, language kind of way about what those things are. So I would say that the first toolkit is the least obvious and the least worked with of the 3 toolkits, because the people who are really good don't realize what they're good at. And often within the groundwork systems, you know, people who are struggling with their riding just get recommended to do more groundwork. Well, they'll improve their groundwork, and groundwork is helpful. It teaches you lots about timing. It teaches you to observe your horse, but it doesn't necessarily improve your riding. And improving your riding needs really good how-to learning in riding itself. So the first and second toolkits are about boundaries and biomechanics. They're reciprocal, they reinforce each other. Now, when I talk about boundaries, hopefully in the 0 toolkit, your horse learns not to barge through you. And any of you who know Dressage Training TV, which is the online learning that we have put out on the internet, which Ali and I are both involved with, might know about Millie. And when she was younger, she was riding a chestnut pony called Tinker. And she was 12 when she first came to stay with me for a couple of weeks with Tinker. And I was going to give her a lesson, and I walked out into the yard and I saw this chestnut pony kind of career out of the stable with child in tow. And I went, wait a minute, this isn't going to work. And we went back in the stable, and I worked with the pony in the stable, just doing 1 or 2 steps of walk and halt and rein back until the pony was really listening. But I gave myself walls so the pony wasn't going to be able to barge out of the stable and disappear. And then we did it in a bigger stable, and then we did it in a sand paddock, and then we had Millie doing it in a small space, and then doing it in a bigger space, until we had a pony that went, okay, I get it. Children are not for mowing over. And that would be how we gave that pony some boundaries. And we gave Millie, despite her youth and her smallness, the ability to set those boundaries. So together, they solve the catch-22 of riding. Until the horse goes right, the rider cannot sit right. But it's also true that till the rider sits right, the horse can't go right. So if we can use the groundwork to set up some ground rules, so the horse goes enough, respects your leg, that you're not sitting there tempted to wiggle and jiggle and shove to try and make him go. And the horse understands the reins as woe and is willing to respond as the reins as woe, so you're not tempted to pull like crazy and have a whole load of other things go wrong. And if we can work our way into this catch-22 through the way we work with the 0 toolkit and the first toolkit, it's better than using draw reins and gadgets and God knows what else. And the horse work well from the ground really does get a conscious understanding of the meaning of the aids, becomes more rideable, willing, and appropriately reactive. And I'm not sure if I really said when I talked about going to buy horses, how shocked I am about how few horses have that. You just pick up the reins, put yourself in a training position, ask for a step back, ask for a go, ask for a whoa, and horses are normally clueless. A huge percentage of horses have virtually no idea that the legs mean go and the reins mean whoa, and that is shocking. And it would have been my horses too, despite all the work I was trying to do on biomechanics, until, you know, I and we really began to take the zero toolkit seriously. And if you're on the ground watching your horse trialing behaviors, like when I talked about the horse kicking up with its hind leg, you're going to interpret this with less fear. You're not going to think that your horse is mean, bad, or dangerous. You're just going to go, wrong answer, horse, sorry, keep trying, and stay neutral. And if you were riding, maybe you just back off because you get a little bit worried or frightened, and then you've rewarded the wrong thing, and you've muddied the waters and got yourself in a less organized situation. And when the boundaries are really good, you as a rider are less likely to do what we call filling in for a non-responsive horse. And that might be shoving, going kick, 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 wiggle, jiggle, shove, kick, kick, nag, nag, all that kind of stuff, which so many riders do, and which it can take a lot of self-discipline and organization and self-belief to not do, is the rider filling in for a non-responsive horse. And we're trying to get ourselves a responsive horse beginning in the groundwork, so the rider is less tempted to fill in for that horse, and has more chance of the horse going well enough that the rider can more easily sit right. And so we're working into that catch-22. So I said this earlier, that both toolkits involve learning by trial and error. We want the horse to learn by trial and error as he seeks release from the handler. And the learner owns the learning when that happens. When the rider really realizes, oh, I just did X and the horse did Y, they own the learning rather than they're obediently trying to do what they're being told to do. Immediate reward and release helps the horse to get it. From his perspective, he's training you to stop bugging him. And immediate feedback also helps riders to get it. I sometimes say to riders, you want to hear me saying the words, good fix. That's it. Keep going. And we just try and give feedback that quickly. Good fix. Got it. Just in a couple of words. Now, within what you're doing on the ground, you would never whip tap and do a stop aid with the reins at the same time. And actually, in that, you're following the old French school of riding, which says, quote, legs without reins, reins without legs. Thinking that you can kick the back end and hold the front end, which a lot of people do, and I think was really the idea when I was younger, that you created collection by kicking the back and holding the front. You're contradicting yourself in a way that can create conflict behavior. And the story I told you of my horse that went to rear and leap, that was around conflict behavior, even though I was doing my best to not induce a conflict. But he went, oh my God, this is a conflict situation. And he learned to not do that. So a rider with poor biomechanics can be incomprehensible to the horse. If you wiggle and you jiggle and you shove and you kick and you pull and you do all this stuff at the same time, you can make horses defensive, contorted, and neurotic. This is sad but true. The well-ridden horse who has a conscious understanding of the aids is more secure and much less likely to seek evasive behaviors that give him a win. The notion of evasions, I've put that in brackets there because we don't tend to talk about it that way. I mean, water flows downhill and horses do what they do because of their body type, maybe because of their aches and pains and restrictions, and maybe because of the crazy information they're getting from the rider. You know, when and if the two toolkits are in conflict, what is the horse to do? So here's an example of the toolkits being in conflict. So this was one of the first laws of physics that I really saw acted out with riders and horses, and I call it the water ski motorboat principle. So if you lean back whilst riding, the horse will go out from underneath you. And it's like leaning back while standing on a rug on a polished floor. So if you imagine standing on a rug on a polished floor, somebody pulls the rug out forward from underneath you. The rug zooms forward, you topple back one, you topple back. And the more you leant back, the more the rug will go out from underneath you. It's just the same on the horse. You lean back, you're being the water skier to the horse's motorboat. So if you lean back, but you think you're giving a whoa signal, by the laws of physics, what you're actually doing is giving a go signal that the rug will go out from under your seat and from under your feet, or under your bum in this case. So the horse is in a conflict situation here. So he learnt whoa from the ground. You get on, your reins are saying whoa, but by the laws of physics, your body's saying accelerate out from underneath me, like the rug on the polished floor, or like the motorboat to my water skier. So what's a horse going to do? A type A horse with more go will probably just zoom out from underneath you while you're pulling and he's pulling. A type B horse, who's the kind of couch potato like type B people, may kind of whoa anyway, but he'll do it in a very heavy in the rain kind of a way. So if you can make your riding where you're congruent between how you organize your body and what you originally taught on the ground, you'll make sense to the horse. But if what you do on top is not congruent with what you taught on the ground, then by definition, you're creating conflict. Okay, so just to finish up a little bit before we do questions, the second toolkit, this might sound a little complex, can be taught through the lens of itself, the zero toolkit, or the first toolkit. So if the second toolkit is taught through the lens of itself, the rider's doing the movements because they're required in dressage tests and because they're supposed to help her horse in a particular way. She may not appreciate which movements are more or less helpful for her particular horse. Every horse will want to have its shoulders a little bit to the right or the left of the hindquarters. That's going to affect which movements are difficult and which movements are easy and which movements it really helps you to do and which movements play into the pattern. And it may be that an instructor is prescribing the movements going, well, never mind that you can't sit the trot and you can't do this and you can't do that, let's do shoulder in. And in that, she's probably hoping, fantasizing, and almost imagining she's teaching herself. I like to teach the second toolkit through the lens of the first toolkit. So in other words, my guiding principles are skill development, how-to information, providing effective remedies for the ways that humans and horses typically contort themselves. And sometimes I joke that the lateral movements were sent by the devil to tempt riders to kick and pull. And learning how to not kick and pull and how to organize your body within the lateral movements is a big deal and so counterintuitive that most riders feel like they're learning a new language and really struggle. Now, we can also teach the second toolkit through the lens of the zero toolkit. So we could teach the movements first from the ground. And I don't know how much Ali in her webinars has shown you how we might teach shoulder in from the ground and travers from the ground and even half pass from the ground. And if the horse has that knowledge, at least we won't have the clueless rider riding the clueless horse. And the horse may fill in for the rider if the rider's a bit disorganized. But sooner or later, the laws of physics and biomechanics will prevail and what happens will tend to go downhill. So it's better that the horse maybe gives you the benefit of the doubt, fills in for you a little bit, then he just goes, what? What the hell? This doesn't make sense. A way of thinking of teaching the second toolkit through the zero toolkit would be if the emphasis is on this hand here and that leg there, but not so much on the fact that you have a body and your body will get disorganized by the movement, because believe me, getting yourself on the balance point in those lateral movements is an art form. And there could be, from the zero toolkit, a very good emphasis on reactivity, which if the rider's at the right level, getting where you can have the horse as forward and organized in shoulder in, rather than you slow it down and it kind of goes clunker, 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 clunker as you go along the long side. That can be a very valuable zero toolkit way of helping with the second toolkit. So from the zero toolkit, it can be positive or it can be negative. And if you have all the toolkits and you can play between them and be congruent between them, that's where you come in with, as a rider, the best skills for making sense to your horse and feeding information to him in bite-sized chunks. And as a trainer or a coach, going in able to give your rider information in bite-sized chunks, inviting her through trial and error to work out what works. I often like to say that riders all have to reinvent the wheel. They all have to be up there discovering from themselves what works, as riders before them have discovered that. But they're going to do it with the benefit of more consciousness, more language, and potentially more ability to pass those skills on to others. Okay, so I think this is the point where I get to shut up for a minute and we find out what we've got in the way of questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mary. That's so informative. I absolutely love listening to it. So thank you so much. Folks, type your questions away. We've got a couple already, so I'll ask those. But please, if you've got more questions, please add them to the list. So in the Q&A. So Mary, question, what are your thoughts on pre-lunging the horse to get them tired before getting on?
Well, you're better off doing groundwork very often than lunging. That doesn't mean to say that lunging is a very bad idea always, but it can reinforce flight. You know, horses are flight animals, and in lunging you're saying, well, let's have you flee in circles until you're tired. And if it's not that, then it can have some value. And on the whole, you're better off coming in from a groundwork perspective, going, well, can you control and organize your body? Rather like Linda Tellington-Jones likes to say, well, it's easier to work with a few pounds of brain than 1,000 pounds of muscle. Yeah, so groundwork is coming in going, let's work with a few pounds of brain. Lunging is coming in going, let's tire out 1,000 pounds of muscle. And the danger is that you just have to keep doing it and keep doing it as the horse gets fitter and fitter. So there may be a time and a place, but it probably isn't ideal.
Great, thank you. Next question. What do you think about doing combined reinforcement with a food reward as a positive reinforcer?
So yes, lots of horses really benefit from a positive reinforcement. And if you're having a struggle motivating your horse, then that's the way to do it. I'm never so sure that it carries over really well from groundwork to riding, because when horses are in riding mode and they're moving that fast, they're not in eating mode. But it may carry over, certainly with some horses, but you can get a horse a lot more interested and a lot more motivated with using positive reinforcement as well.
Great, thank you.
And that's something you might get Ali to do a webinar on too, because she's got lots of experience of horses where that does help and horses where it doesn't help.
Okay, no, that's really...
Yeah, if the horse is just going to mug you, then it's a little bit more tricky, and it has to be done really well to make it work, rather than just get the horse mugging you more.
Yeah, get the timing bag on, I guess. Yeah. Another question, this time from Laura. Can adding long reining as a step between the groundwork you suggested and riding?
Long reining, if you're really good at it, can be a very good tool. Again, it could just reinforce flight if not done well. In fact, I have memories actually of a student of mine years ago long lining her horse around the village I live in, and I took my quad down the drive to drive home and found myself stopping the car in the middle of the road, getting out of the car going, whoa, as the horse was coming towards me, trotting down the road with her trotting behind it, 30 yards behind. So that didn't work so well. One of our other colleagues actually within the group of coaches I've trained is very, very good at long lining and uses it extremely well, and it can be a really good tool. But, you know, most of these things are down to the skill with which they're done.
What would you say is the difference between...
I could tell you a story on that. Let me tell you a story. So a lot of people who know the Zero Toolkit would know the name Tom Dorrance. He died quite a few years ago as an old man and was one of the people in the beginnings of the sort of natural horsemanship world in the US. And he told the story. So I met him. He was delightful. And he told the story of, as a fairly elderly guy, sitting there on his little stool with an assistant helping him loading a horse. And at some point, he picked up a pebble from beside him, threw it towards the horse's butt. It hit the horse on the butt, and the horse walked in the trailer. And a group of people rushed towards him and went, "Where did you get that stone? What kind of stone was that?" As if what he'd just done was thrown a magic horse loading stone. And they wanted to find a magic horse loading stone on the ground. Well, what was magic was his timing, his accuracy, the amount of force he used, and how that was just a little nudge that was a next step fix that just took the horse to the next level. But people are going, "Surely I can get a magic horse loading stone. They're here somewhere. Show me one." Right? So there's not a magic horse loading stone for lunging or a magic horse loading stone for long lining. It's down to the skill, the timing, the appropriateness, the moment.
Brilliant. I think it's something that people often don't have coaching sessions on, long lining. You kind of...
No, there aren't many people, especially in this country, who are really skilled at it. And you need the right kit, and not many people have the right kit. So to be really good at it takes some doing.
Yeah. No questioning my long lining skills. Another question. Why don't the equestrian disciplines develop and use more off-horse technology to teach and get to a certain level of procedural learning and balance before having pupils get on the horse? Great question, Jab.
Well, I think that's happening more now that we have riding simulators. Of course, it's not just a magic riding simulator. It depends how good the coach is and what the coach is drawing the person's attention to on the simulator and what skill she's teaching, at what moment, at what level of the alphabet. One of the strengths of my work, I think, is the dismounted exercises. So we have lots of dismounted exercises which develop skills and body awareness off horse that then get taken on horse. And most coaches don't have access to those kind of exercises and haven't thought through it in that way. But, you know, really learning to organize your body off horse makes a difference to on horse. And I would recommend for people doing a martial art, especially if you can find the good teacher. Or with Pilates or yoga, it really needs to be the good teacher, the one that says, "Hang on a minute, you've got a rotation to the right here. Can you just organize your body like this?" And the danger of people just go to the gym is they go to the gym and they do the exercises in the way that comes naturally, and they're working within their asymmetry, strengthening the strong bits, getting them relatively stronger to the weak bits, making their contortions more ingrained and stronger. If you're going to go to the gym, you need a very good personal trainer who's a really good communicator and a really good observer of the body. Yeah,
thank you. And we've just got time for one very last question. A quick one, hopefully from Jan. What is the right long lining kit?
That's a good question. I can tell you where you can get it from, except I don't know. What's the name of the saddlery? Oh. It's Hannah Griffith's saddlery, which is in Hertfordshire. She stocks it, but I can't remember what it's called. So I can't answer that question, but I would be able to send you an email.
Great. If you send that to me, I can pop it out when we send the link to the
yes.
That'd be super.
Yes, but anybody that buys that kit needs to get themselves help to use it, or you could get in a real muddle.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. And we're pretty much out of time for questions, and that's just been fantastic, Mary. And to step in at the last minute, it's been even more awesome. I think like we've got it's been a really lovely surprise. I'm just going to quickly, before we depart, just quickly share screen just so people know what's coming in the next little while. So hopefully you can see my screen. So we've got Chris Ainscoe coming to talk about demystifying carriage driving, which will be a really unusual one for us. He's a riding trainer and carriage driving trainer and international competitor. We've got vet Hannah Briggs coming to talk about what we should be noticing when buying a new horse or pony. Like I said, Mary, earlier, it's a really tricky one. And then Simon Kikos is coming back for his third webinar on the 28th of Feb. He's going to be talking about strengthening exercises for young horses. That's some of the things that are coming up in the near future. So
could I just butt in a minute with the infomercial? So
yeah,
my
please.
website is mary-wanless.com, and there's more about this work online at dressagetraining.tv. And yeah, so folks that want to find out more can find out more.
Great. And I think you do clinics around various different locations around the country as well, don't you?
Yes, so this year, rather than being based as I've been in Gloucestershire, we're doing clinics in a number of different places, and they're available. You can find information on my website. Excellent.
So they're all on the website.
Yep.
That fabulous. Thank you, Mary. It's been an awesome evening. So thank you so much for your time. It will all disappear in a second when I press end to the webinar, but thank you very much. I'm sure everybody will have really enjoyed it. And guys, as the webinar ends, a quick questionnaire does come up. If you could just fill it in for us, and also let us know what other types of webinars you'd like to see over coming weeks and months, that would be really helpful. So Mary, thank you very much for your time, and we'll hopefully see you again.
Right, thank you. Thank you everybody for coming and giving your time too.
Bye-bye.